A few months ago, Caitlin asked me to do a photo shoot for our engagement, and she picked a quiet railway station. It was actually kind of like a museum to do the photo shoot. And if you know me, and you know me well, professional photo shoots are not exactly my favorite thing to do. I'm much more comfortable teaching in a room of 300 people, than posing next to a vintage trolley car, pretending that I actually hang out at train depots. I don't really like doing pictures. I feel like it's kind of a waste of my time. But the reality is it really mattered to her. And so I opted in. But I didn't just opt in, reluctantly. And, I didn't do it resentfully. I did it with intention. I did it consciously. I brought the best version of myself to the process because the reality was it was important to her. When you're clear about the vision that you have for your relationship, you understand something very important. You don't have to love every preference, but you do have to decide what you're going to show up for and what you're not willing to show up for. And that's a perfect doorway into what we're going to be talking about in this session this week. Boundaries. If you've been following the series, you can feel the progression. Vision gives us context, needs, wants, and desires clarify what matters. Expectations are how we hold those with real people. And boundaries are how we uphold them. Boundaries are probably the most talked about and most misunderstood part of relationship. So we're going to clear it up here. A boundary is simply the way that we uphold expectations with other people. That's it. It's not a wall. It's not a threat. It's not a dramatic line in the sand. A boundary is the container through which your expectations are going to be honored. If you've already clarified your vision, defined your needs, wants, and desires, and evaluated whether your expectations are reasonable, then a boundary is simply how you uphold that expectation with the other person. Here's the distinction that most people tend to miss. You can only have a boundary if you can uphold the boundary. If you cannot uphold it, there is no boundary, only frustration. The biggest mistake that most people make is using boundaries in an attempt to control or manage the other person's behavior. They try to get someone to do something or stop doing something or become someone different than they are. And this is going to inherently fail. You cannot control another person's nervous system. You cannot make someone want what they do not want. You cannot force emotional alignment. The moment that you try, you're going to lose your power because you're attempting to manage something that is inherently outside of your control. Boundaries are not about managing the other person. It's not about managing them. They are about managing your space. Here's how boundaries actually work. Once you've clarified an expectation, you then communicate it. Not as you're wrong or you're hurting me, but as here's something that I need you to understand about how I operate. At that point, the other person has a choice. They can opt in or they can opt out. And then you have a choice. You can stay, you can adjust, or you can change your level of engagement, or ultimately you can leave, you can disengage. That's what makes boundaries real. Not the request, it's the follow-through. This is where needs, wants, and desires really matter because we don't uphold all boundaries the same way. And that's the piece that most people tend to overlook. If the expectation is a need, then the boundary must have a clear cause and effect. If it's not met, something changes. There's a reaction. Not because you're punishing the other person, not because they're bad, but because you're simply upholding your environment. For example, if monogamy is part of your vision for romantic relationship and that boundary is a need and is violated, the relationship is going to transition. That's not drama. That's just simply you staying in alignment with your values and the vision you want to fulfill. If a need level boundary cannot be upheld, the relationship is eventually going to end or a significant evolution of the relationship is going to occur. And if you cannot enforce it, it was never a boundary to begin with. If the expectation is a want or a desire, maturity enters the picture. Most expectations in relationship are actually wants and desires, not needs. And most wants and desires are okay if they go unmet. That doesn't mean that you suppress them. It means that you manage yourself around them. Sometimes the most powerful boundary move is simply acceptance. You look at the other person and you recognize they either are willing or they are unwilling to meet the boundary. And instead of escalating, you adjust your expectation. You stop being surprised. You stop being disappointed. You stop suffering over something that isn't essential. That's not resignation. That's leadership. Now let's make this really practical, because the distinction isn't just academic, it's directional. There's a single question that will tell you whether you're upholding something too tightly or not tightly enough. Does the vision still happen if this gets met or not met? If your larger vision for life and the relationship still unfolds, even if the expectation goes unmet, it's likely a want or a desire. Then you realign yourself. If your vision cannot unfold without the expectation being met, it's a need. Hold it strong. Define how you will uphold it and be prepared to follow through. Notice the difference. This isn't about impulse. It isn't about a momentary yearning. It's about vision. One of the most practical ways that we uphold boundaries is through levels of engagement. Not controlling others, managing engagement. You always have options. No engagement, low engagement, medium engagement, high engagement, or redefining the relationship entirely. Let's say you have a friend who is chronically late. If punctuality is simply a preference, then you accept it and you stop getting upset because they're 6 minutes late. If punctuality is a need for certain activities like catching a flight or attending a concert, you don't have to invite them to those events. You adjust your engagement. There's actually a great case study in my book, Relationship Alchemy, demonstrating this exact point. The same principle applies in leadership. Not every employee warrants high engagement. Some are high contributors. They receive high engagement. Some are steady contributors. Therefore, they get medium engagement. And some are fine, but they're not core. Therefore, low engagement. Your boundary manages your investment of time and energy relative to vision and outcome, not circumstance. Now, here's the real question that people ask once they understand that. How long do I allow this to continue? Because boundary setting is not a knee-jerk reaction. 9 times out of 10, relationships can evolve with clarity and structure. But evolution requires a clear ask, opt-in from the other person, your ability to enforce, and your willingness to enforce. And there must be positive movement over time. If there is no evolution and a need-level boundary continues to be violated, then something must change. Not because you're angry, because you are aligned. And as I've shared throughout this series, this is a different paradigm of relationship. It redefines what relationships are for, how they're supposed to work, and how to design them instead of just letting them become. Boundaries are not weapons. They are architecture. They protect vision. They uphold expectations. They clarify engagement. And when done well, they create freedom, not control. Next week, we're going to move into the final element of relationship alchemy, communication. Because communication is the vehicle for managing and upholding boundaries. The less effective we are at communication, the messier our boundaries become. The more skilled we are, the cleaner and more empowering they feel. If you want deeper training on this, especially how to hold boundaries under emotional pressure, we'll be working through it live next weekend at the Relationship Alchemy Intensive. There may be a handful of last-minute spots available at the time of this recording, and you'll find a link in the resources below. For now, sit with this. In the last week, was there a boundary that you tried to set but didn't actually enforce? And if you're honest, were you trying to manage the other person? Or were you managing your own environment? If you're willing, leave me a comment and tell me what you noticed. even a sentence or two, as all of your reflections and feedback shape where we're going to go next with the series. Also, one more quick thing to share. If you're like me and you like to absorb information via audio, we've also launched the connectionfix podcast. So whether you want to read, listen, or watch, the connectionfix is available to you. We've got you covered. You'll find links in the resources below. Have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to connecting with you again next week.